the ACC National Capital Region 2021 annual meeting. I'm Tamara Jack, ACC NCR president for next 20 minutes or so, and CLO CFO of LMI. I'm wrapping up my tenure during one of the chapter's most remarkable years, which despite the obvious challenges was still widely successful, and we'll talk about that shortly. But before we get started with the substance of today's meeting, just a few housekeeping matters. This event, as with any event since pretty much March that we've held, is technology facilitated. If you have any technical problems, please reach out to Shannon Graving, Stephanie Minkoff, or any ACC NCR staff member. They will do their best to help you, but we found that the easiest thing to do and one that solves most problems is if you just leave the meeting and then log back in. But if the problem consists, do know that we are recording this program and we will make it available on our website. So if you can't make it now, you can listen to it later, watch and listen to it later. All right, so now on to our meeting. 2020 was difficult, right, for many reasons, logistically, personally, professionally, but we're still tremendously proud of all that we accomplished in light of a global pandemic and social and economic upheaval. We started 2020 with 3 priorities and then added one more in light of COVID-19. Despite the pandemic, we made great progress with regard to each of those priorities. The first was to build and expand upon our core activity, hosting programs. During the year, thousands of in-house counsel attended more than 100 events, and despite moving all programs held after mid-March to an online format, they were well attended. The second priority was to raise the profile of in-house counsel. We did so through our virtual Corporate Counsel Awards reception, celebrating our 40th anniversary, including many milestones and leaders over the years, and partnering with our Diamond sponsor, Paul Sinelli, to launch In-House Influence, a podcast featuring in-house leaders discussing their formative experiences. The third priority was our most ambitious and important, to improve and expand our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, and that we did. We expanded the pre-existing committee dedicated to our D&I efforts, and it is now our largest volunteer group in the chapter. We hosted 4 standalone educational programs and a half-day online conference dedicated to D&I. We added to our pipeline of activities by co-hosting the pilot Best Foot Forward program with Clio and the ACC Foundation. We held a training for our top leadership team, formed a D&I advisory board, and featured the tremendous work of the initiative to advance the Blue and Black partnership. And as Greg will detail shortly, we're just getting started. The fourth priority was pivoting in response to COVID. Together, not only did we transition our programs and social events online, but we graduated our Leadership Academy class of 2020 and worked with local legal departments to host 12 amazing corporate scholars who, like the rest of us, learned to work from home. In addition, we launched a Career Assistance Task Force to provide resources, mentoring, and more to our members whose jobs were lost or insecure. So on behalf of the board, I want to express our sincere gratitude to our volunteer leaders, our sponsors, and most importantly to our staff. You all made it all possible. Your resilience and dedication during difficult times was remarkable, and it will not be forgotten. So thank you. Now we're excited to look forward. So it is my pleasure, and it is my last act as president, to announce the election of our new officers and slate of board members. So those on the ballot, when I call your name, if you could please briefly unmute yourself, say hello, and wave so everyone on the meeting can see you. And then attendees, if you have speaker view loaded, as Shannon said on Zoom, the faces will pop up on your screen when their audio is engaged. All right, so we'll start with the officers. President-elect Mary Chapin, Chief Legal Officer, Vice President and Corporate Secretary, National Student Clearinghouse.
Hello, everyone.
Vice President of Programming, Steve Sherman, General Counsel, Americas BSI Group.
Great to see everybody. Belated Happy New Year.
Vice President of Community Leadership and Engagement, Diane Ernest. Senior Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary, Carey International.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here.
Secretary, Stephanie Gilliard, Corporate Vice President, Legal Affairs, and General Counsel, Colonial Downs Group. Stephanie, are you on mute? We'll take that as a yes, Shannon?
Yes, she may have had to step out.
Okay. Treasurer, Laura.
I'm here. I'm so sorry.
Hi, Stephanie.
I couldn't find it. What the heck? Okay.
Great, thank you. Treasurer, Laura Farley, General Counsel, Virginia Realtors.
Hi, everybody.
Excellent. Now we'll move on to the directors. For a term expiring in 2022, Kathy Westcott, Senior Director, Legal Affairs and Deputy General Counsel, the Pew Charitable Trusts.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you, Kathy. For terms expiring in 2024, Charlotte Bernard, Counsel, Commercial Services, Hilton.
Hi, everyone.
Mary Chapin, National Student Clearinghouse. Rhonda Lees, Vice President and Senior Counsel, American Bankers Association.
Hi.
Amit Patel, Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer, Principal Compliance Officer, Senior Counsel, the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab.
Hello, everybody.
Steve Sherman, General Counsel, BSI, America's BSI Group. And last but not least, Greg Watchman, Vice President and Deputy General Counsel, Employment Law and Employee Relations, Freddie Mac.
Hi, everyone.
A sufficient number of members submitted proxies approving the election of the slate submitted by the nominating committee, and so the slate is elected. So light up that board with lots of good reactions. It's now my congratulations to our new officers and directors. Congratulations, folks. All right, now it's my pleasure to welcome Greg Watchman, Vice President, Deputy General Counsel, Employment Law and Employee Relations, and Freddie Mac, to the virtual podium as he begins his term as President of ACC National Capital Region. Welcome, Greg.
Thanks very much, Tamara. I'm honored to serve as president of the chapter for this coming year and very excited about the work that you started that we'll get to continue. My first action is going to be to recognize and thank you, Tamara, for your tremendous leadership in these very challenging circumstances. Tamara, I think you showed great energy, great passion, and great commitment to build on the chapter's past successes and enhance connections between members, companies, sponsors in our community. You made many, many contributions this year, Tamara, but on behalf of the board and staff, I do want to call out two particular contributions that really stand out. First, during a very challenging time of the pandemic and lots of other major issues going on in our society, you led the chapter in a way that we not only survived, but the chapter thrived. Just in terms of our programming, you and our amazing staff led a seamless execution of our switch from live programming to webcast-only programming as a safety measure. And that went off fabulously. We still had 70 to 80 educational programs, which is par for any other year, on a broad range of topics, many involving COVID itself. And the attendance for these programs was just fantastic. There are many members who still, or maybe even more, wanted and needed CLE programming from us, and you delivered and the staff delivered. So that's a major accomplishment in my mind. Secondly, you built a great team to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion within the chapter. You enhance the breadth and depth of diversity and equity and inclusion programs and activities, some of which you noted in your remarks. And this happened at a critical time in our nation's journey towards social justice. So absolutely fantastic contributions this year. Thank you so much. It was also absolutely wonderful to get to know you much better this year, Tamara. You are a strong leader, and you are an absolute delight to work with on a personal level. So thanks for all you brought to the chapter. And now we'd like to ask you to please open the gift we delivered to you earlier as a small token of our appreciation for your leadership.
Thank you, Greg. It's in a wonderful package. And it will be put to a great use to chill some champagne for next Wednesday, most likely. So thank you very much. It's wonderful.
That's great. Can you read the inscription, Tamara?
Yes. So it's ACC NCR, presented to Tamara Jack in appreciation for her service, President 2020. Thank you.
You're very welcome and richly deserved. And we're not letting you go so easily. I look forward to continuing to work with you as the immediate past president as we move forward this year.
Thank you, Greg.
All right, so next I'd like to share some thoughts about the chapter's direction in 2021. I think it's fair to say that Shannon and the NCR staff do a great job at delivering so many CLE programs, pro bono opportunities, community service programs, networking opportunities, and more every year. And we're going to continue to deliver all of this in 2021. But I believe that we must do more. The tragic events of 2020 and the last couple of weeks have focused our nation on the need to eliminate individual and institutional racial and social injustice from our society. I have to ask, having seen so many of these incidents, how many wake-up calls do we really need before we actually wake up? As lawyers, I think we have an opportunity and an obligation to be forceful advocates for social justice. As a community, we are 2,500 lawyers strong. We are 900 companies and organizations strong, and we are 50 sponsors strong. We can generate a lot of impact if we all work together. So with that in mind, I am pleased to announce the 2021 ACC NCR Racial and Social Justice Challenge. With the support of the board, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Forum, and NCR staff, I'm hereby challenging each and every one of you, every member, every company and organization, and every sponsor to expand DE&I efforts within your organization and to fight for racial and social justice within your community. If you haven't joined the fight, it is time to suit up. If you have already been doing great work in this area, it is time to do more. And of course, we want you to tell us about it. So come on, people, let's do this for everyone who has suffered hurt, loss, and pain as a result of racism in this country. Now, here are 3 ways we intend to help you do more. First, we intend to start this year developing programs, materials, guidance, and other help to empower members, especially those in small and medium-sized legal departments, to expand their company's internal diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. If your company has already implemented successful diversity activities and programs, you can meet the challenge by sharing those materials with our members so that they can bring them back to their companies and expand what they're doing. Examples include mentorship or sponsorship programs, pay equity or representation studies, best practices in diverse recruiting, including diverse interview slates, blind resumes, and the like, diversity requirements for outside law firms, diversity metrics and corporate scorecard items, and there are many other options, some of which you all may come up with on your own. Please consider what your company could share to get this effort going. And of course, if you're looking for that kind of help, stay tuned because we are starting to develop these kinds of materials that we hope to gather from our member companies and others. Second, we already connect members with a slew of great pro bono opportunities, including the Whitman Walker Clinic, Legal Services of Northern Virginia, and more. But this year, we hope to identify additional opportunities in the pro bono space for individual members to work with leading civil rights groups on racial and social justice litigation and advocacy. This was something I had the opportunity to do early in my career. As a young attorney, I volunteered to work on fair housing tester litigation for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. This was back in the 1980s. That work was incredibly rewarding, and I promise each and every one of you that if you volunteer on a pro bono basis for this type of work, it will be very rewarding for you as well. To get this effort going, we need additional volunteers for our pro bono forum. So please put a note in the chat if you'd like to volunteer to help with the pro bono forum. This outreach effort really requires no previous experience, so jump on in if you can. Third, we are launching today the first racial and social justice fundraising campaign for NCR. The fundraising campaign will be for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, a leading civil rights organization. The breadth of the Lawyers Committee's work is really quite remarkable. Voting rights, criminal justice, employment rights, immigration, education, fair housing, healthcare, the list goes on. Check out their website to see what's happening down at the Lawyers Committee, and we'll hear from Damon today more about that in a moment. I'm asking each of you to please kickstart your response to the 2021 ACC NCR Challenge by giving generously to this fantastic organization. Our goal is to exceed $40,000 in our campaign, which will last for a couple of months. And we have already raised $10,000 or more from our board and the Leadership Advisory Council, which is comprised of past chapter presidents. At this point, I'd like to invite our 2021 Diamond sponsor, the Polsinelli Law Firm, to say a few words about the fundraising campaign. With us today is Phil Hampton, a senior partner at Polsinelli and the new Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the firm. Phil, would you like to make a few comments?
Thank you, Greg. First off, I want to thank the ACC NCR for bringing together in-house counsel to support the great work of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. From its founding at the behest of President John F. Kennedy, the Lawyers Committee has been at the forefront of racial and social justice for more than 50 years. Their great work has recently been acknowledged by President-elect Biden, who announced his intention to nominate the current president and CEO, Kristen Clark, to be his Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. But I have some personal connections with the Lawyers Committee. In fact, I consulted one of the current co-chairs of the Lawyers Committee, the almost legendary Tom Sager, to discuss whether or not I should even apply for the job. Because as was said, I was a senior partner and, you know, maybe some things had passed me on by. But after talking me through it, Tom implored me to apply for the position, which I recently was provided with by Polsinelli. Polsinelli is a national firm, and its leadership is steadfastly committed to having a diverse, equitable, and inclusive community. As part of its commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and as an ACC NCR sponsor, Polsinelli is thrilled to announce an initial contribution of $2,000 to the campaign for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. We invite all the ACC sponsors to join us and to donate to this important organization. But more importantly, I encourage everyone in this meeting to personally give to the campaign, not just through your organization, but to personally give to this campaign. And I know that Shannon can provide you, as she already has me, a link that allows you to contribute in less than 90 seconds. And with that, take it away, Greg.
Thank you so much, Phil. That's wonderful. And I want to thank the Polsinelli Law Firm for phenomenal partnership with our chapter and for a very, very generous donation to the fundraising campaign for the Lawyers Committee. Thank you so much. All right, folks, so let's show our community how we can turn the national dialogue on race in 2020 into big, bold action in 2021. Please accept the challenge. To sign up, tomorrow you'll be getting the newsletter, which will include a form to sign up for the challenge. And you can email that to diversityandinclusion@nationalcapitalregion.com. Keep us posted on your efforts through that email address, because at the end of the year, we will be recognizing the most impactful members, companies and organizations, and sponsors with awards. Lastly, if you wish to donate to the fundraising campaign, please visit lawyerscommittee.org/ACC-NCR. That's lawyerscommittee.org/ACC-NCR. It is now my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Damon Hewitt. Our previously scheduled speaker, as we've noted, Ms. Kristen Clark, President of the Lawyers Committee, deeply regrets being unable to join us today. As Phil just mentioned, she has been announced as President Biden's intended nominee to head the Civil Rights Division at Justice. This is fantastic news. But of course, she's already working hard with the transition team on her nomination, and for that reason cannot join us today. We are, however, delighted to have Damon Hewitt here with us today. Damon is Executive Vice President at the Lawyers Committee, and he joins us today with a rich tapestry of civil rights and philanthropic experience spanning 20 years. At the Lawyers Committee, Damon coordinates the organization's strategic, programmatic, and operational efforts to advance the fight for racial justice. Prior to joining the Lawyers Committee, Damon was the inaugural executive director for the Executives Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, and served as the chief liaison from the philanthropic community to the White House on policies impacting young men of color. Damon also served in a variety of leadership roles at the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, advancing both civil rights litigation and policy work across many, many fronts. So Damon, we are absolutely honored to have you with us today to update us on the committee's work and to tell us how we can support it going forward. The floor is yours, Damon.
Thank you so much, Greg, and thank you, Tamara, for your prior leadership. I'm excited, Greg, about what you've announced today. Thank you so much to Shannon and team, and also to Phil. Everything that you've announced today, the pieces that benefit the Lawyers Committee, but also just your stand that you're taking is just so very important, and it's really the best of what the private bar has to offer. So from the bottom of my heart, I thank you. And I thank you also for the chance to be with you today, standing in for Kristen. You know, Kristen and I graduated from law school the same year, over 20 years ago, and she was always one of the peers to whom you look up, right? She always stands head and shoulders above the others, and there's no one better primed for this new position, which we're confident she will secure than she is. And it's bittersweet for us, but it's important for the country. That we have strong leadership in the Civil Rights Division. So we look forward to that. So you all, a couple of you, Greg and Phil, talked about the Lawyers Committee, and many of you are familiar with the organization. Many of you have probably volunteered before as part of the election protection effort or in some other pro bono capacity. But I want to just talk a little bit about a different perspective about who we are. You know that we were founded by President Kennedy in 1963, and you know that it was a call to service for the top lawyers from the nation's private bar. Many of you may not know that for its time, it was a rather diverse group. For fact, the first African-American woman to graduate from my law school alma mater, Penn Carey Law School, Sadie Tanner Moselle Alexander, was in the room at the White House for that important day, as were a few dozen other African-American lawyers as well. So it was, for its time, certainly a diverse group. And so that's always been part of our ethos, to foster diversity of perspective, to be in a common fight. I like to think about President Kennedy's call to action not just as a form of charity or pure pro bono service, not just even for what it really was, which was a call to private attorneys general to augment even what the esteemed AG, his own brother, late Bobby Kennedy, was trying to do in the Justice Department at the time, and so many legends of the Civil Rights Division in its early years since it was created in the late 1950s. It was really, in my view, an implicit political project, a political project to push the question of what can a multiracial group, a diverse group of legal professionals and support professionals do? Can they actually center the lived experience of Black people who were oppressed at the time and frankly continue to be oppressed in so many ways, and also a broader spectrum of view to the experiences of other people of color? Can we center those experiences in our day-to-day work so that everything that we do is centered on what matters for their challenges, the obstacles they face, for their aspirations, and for their opportunity? But another part of that political project was really about defining or redefining not just what it means to do pro bono service, but what it means to be a lawyer in the first place. What it means to actually be a member of the bar, what type of duty and responsibility we have, not as adjunct to our day-to-day work, but frankly as core to our day-to-day work. President-elect Biden talked on the campaign trail, I believe, about how he made a decision to go into public service at one point as a defender because he felt that the people who needed the most help couldn't afford to be defended in those days, and that's frankly still the case. But today, the practice of law, as you know, is drastically different than it was at that time. The options that you have at your disposal are many, and we're so pleased to see so many of the law firms and corporate legal departments, of which you all are a part, not only allowing and crediting their lawyers for pro bono work, matters here and there, but also encouraging it and developing, frankly, deep partnerships. And that's what we're feeling from you all and seeing from you all throughout your organization today, and with the announcement today from Greg, and also the announcement of the contribution via Phil and Paul Sonelli. It's not about the transaction, it's about the depth of commitment and partnership. It's whether we can mobilize simultaneously our time in terms of pro bono service, our talent in terms of the expertise you offer, and also our treasure, which is often monetary, but not always, in service of a common mission. And we see that you're doing that, and we see that's increasingly happening with the private bar. But let's make no mistake, there are no victory laps to be run. Our nation continues to be in crisis. I think the events of January 6th put that in the starkest terms. The same day that much of the news broke about Kristen's pending nomination, we also saw literal carnage in our nation's capital, in the area that where you all live and I live in the area that you represent. And it's just sickening, and it turns your stomach. And from what I hear from people who are there in person, it's what you see on television and what you read in the newspapers. Even the best accounts don't even give true credit, true voice to the degree of terror and fear and just mayhem that was abundant. And we also, of course, understand from the pundits and also just from common sense that we have seen that protesters who didn't turn into rioters, who are affiliated with other movements, Black Lives Matter among them, certainly were treated very differently, much more harshly. At the Lawyers Committee, we represented plaintiffs in one of my very favorite cases, and this is the only time I will say this name in this talk. Case was captioned Black Lives Matter versus Trump, based upon the incidents and the attacks on peaceful protesters at Lafayette Square. We've seen the attacks continue. We're representing right now Black churches who were vandalized by groups like the Proud Boys, whom we sued recently. And you may have seen that their leader had there's action being taken against him in criminal context and also via us and others in the civil context. But these actors aren't going away. The divides in our country aren't going away. We know that there's a lot of claims, or what they may call evidence-free or alternative facts. People aren't reading the same information. But sometimes we do read the same information, but it's almost as if they're two different at least two different realities. It's almost as if the facts are agreed upon, but we have different interpretations, as if there were this kind of perpetual summary judgment hearing happening throughout this country, where we're just getting very different reads on things. And so what we started to understand as a civil rights community, and also at the lawyers committee in particular, is that the facts obviously do matter, but it's not only about what information we share with people, like via communications or what have you. It's also about what people believe. It's also about the narrative, the stories that we tell. And so much of our work, and Phil, thank you and Greg for talking a bit about some of our work, and I'll go into a little more detail as time permits here. Our work in criminal justice reform, housing, economic justice, health equity, from COVID relief to reproductive access, especially for women of color who often have less access and are denied, and educational opportunity in the K-12 context, but also increasingly in higher education. And also our work on voting and election protection, and our work to stop hate, because we know that Black people are still the most likely targets, and dare I say victims of hate crimes in this country still. And it's a fact that many people don't get or don't understand. In all of these areas, we've made significant progress and significant strides in partnership with the private bar. I'll talk about a few, but then also talk about what lies on the other side of that progress. In our election work, we undertook, as many of you know, a Herculean effort, relying in large part upon partnerships with the private bar. Partnerships, some were new, but some were longstanding. Just to give you a few numbers, we received about 250,000 calls to our election protection hotline, 866 Our Vote, through Election Day, which is historic numbers. We filled over 42,000 legal volunteerships, over 42,000 members of the private bar from throughout the country, from law firms and corporate legal departments, and some who just hang up their own shingle, all working in common cause. We filed over 30 lawsuits before Election Day, and in total, about 36 lawsuits with a pretty significant success rate in those cases. And so we covered a significant amount of ground throughout the country, focusing on about 36 states. But throughout all of that work, and throughout the historic numbers with over 100 million people voting early, and even in Georgia for the runoff election, over 3 million people voting early, meaning prior to Election Day, we still saw lots of challenges, even though by and large, the election process was smoother than many expected. One of the challenges that we saw, frankly, harkens or foretold the carnage on January 6th, because one of the challenges that was significant was voter intimidation and racial harassment of voters. One of the lawsuits that we filed was against a couple of individuals who had this network for robocalls that called Black voters and falsely claimed that if they voted by mail, that the information would be used by creditors to collect unpaid debts, that it would be used by law enforcement to track them down for outstanding warrants, and that it would be used by the CDC to mandate injections and vaccinations of different types. So you think about that kind of matches and the trigger points that it hits. Economic insecurity and instability in the Black community. You think about police brutality and negative police interactions with the Black community, and you think about the infamous Tuskegee experiment in terms of forced vaccinations and injections. All of these trigger points are designed to tell a story and to stifle participation. The stifling participation is pretty obvious, but the underlying story being told is that you don't belong, that the auspices and agencies of this nation, of the states and of the localities aren't designed for you. In fact, they hurt you and they always will hurt you. And so we have to think about the narratives that come from some of this pushback. As much progress in another context as we made in higher education over the years, and our representation in so many of the cases regarding diversity in higher education, where we're now fighting on 4 different fronts. And Harvard, where we won in the First Circuit, and that case is likely going up to the Supreme Court, we believe. At UNC Chapel Hill, where we had a 2-week trial in the state of a pandemic before district court there. And also, I mentioned Yale, but then also at UT Austin once again, which is again another battleground in federal court once again, even though there have been 2 cases at the Supreme Court level regarding their admissions policy. The continued litigation is sending the message that Black and brown students don't belong, that they're not deserving. So again, we have to think about these narratives, these meta-narratives that are being told through these pushbacks, through these convulsions of democracy, sometimes even violent convulsions of democracy. Who gets a chance? Who gets a second chance? Who is worthy of our empathy and our compassion? Who has a voice? Who has power? And just simply who belongs? Those are the implicit questions being asked when we see this kind of pushback and the kind of things that we saw on January 6th. It's not just about what facts do you think are true, it's about what do you actually believe in your heart of hearts. And that's frankly where we are as a nation. That's really where we are. We're at a crossroads in this country, and as I said earlier, there are no victory laps to be run. Justice, we've learned at this point, especially racial justice, is not self-executing. It doesn't matter who's in the White House. It doesn't matter who controls which branches of Congress. These issues are and have been perennial issues. Now, of course, we've made progress, but we know that periods of progress and reform are often followed by periods of significant reaction and retrenchment. I hope that we're at the bottom of the roller coaster right now on our way up to an ascendant future. I hope that we are on the upslope, but even that is not self-executing. We must remain vigilant as individuals, as organizations, as a concerned community. And we at the Lawyers Committee and all of our sister civil rights organizations, we need the private bar to do that. We need you not just to keep doing what you've been doing, which is also important. We need to lean into a bold new future. And that's why, Greg, I'm so glad to hear about the challenge you set forth today. I didn't know about the details of it before this morning, but I'm so glad to hear that you're charging your membership to look inward and to continue to act outward. Because we have to change institutions, we have to change individuals and stay ever sharp. That's even true for an organization like ours. We don't rest on our laurels. We look inward and we look outward as well as we continue to do the work that we do. There's obviously a number of immediate needs on the policy and litigation front. There's COVID relief. There's the need for attention to families and the microeconomy, not just the stock market and the macroeconomy, because all of our retirement accounts are probably doing pretty well, but how are people doing is the question that we must ask ourselves, and especially how are certain groups of people doing with historic unemployment and in the Black community not having been fully cured despite the claims you may have heard from the nation's soon-to-be prior leadership. There's still a fragility there. You know, my parents are in many ways part of the fruits of the civil rights movement, part of the Black middle class, growing up in Louisiana, myself hailing from New Orleans, Louisiana. But that middle class is fragile. Again, nothing that we have today we can take for granted. Nothing is self-executing. We must remain vigilant. So there are a few things at the Lawyers Committee that we can use your help on going forward. And I'll talk about some kind of broad categories, and then at some point we'll open up for questions. So there's some things we're keeping our eyes on. Number one, for those who are into politics, they say, oh, well, the Senate is switching hands, so, there's time to do this, that, and the other. Look, there's still rules and protocols in the Senate, regardless of your party affiliation, that can tie things up and stop good things from happening. And so we have to remain vigilant, and we do it in a nonpartisan way, of course, and as a C3 restricted organization, of course, as well, although we do have a policy team. But it's important to keep our eyes and hold accountable all of our elected officials, regardless of their party affiliation and regardless of what they said on the campaign trail. We have to pay attention to the so-called, used to be called down ballot races, but there will be the primary races in 2021. Elections at the local level, gubernatorial elections as well. If the inroads that have been made towards communities of color and impoverished and marginalized communities getting access and having power are to stick, those elections matter even more, frankly, than a presidential election, because all politics really are local. We also have to watch the terms by which those elections are conducted. We know that there was broad into access for this historic set of elections in this last presidential cycle because of the pandemic. A lot more access to early voting in most jurisdictions, a lot more access to voting by mail, same-day registration for the first time in some places. And so you think about, some of those are temporary, some of those are permanent by design, depending on the jurisdiction, but will it have staying power? I would say this, and not to open up another can of worms on policy, but if you think about the effect that the ACA or Obamacare had, controversial for some people, but once you give people that kind of access, it's really hard to take it back. It's had a lot of staying power, even in the face of legal and political attacks, and it's helped tens of millions of people. And so we actually hope that we see the same effect, and we have to work for it with respect to broad access to elections. Another issue that many people don't realize is, the twin or the triplet of elections and the census is redistricting. And when you talk about power, how the battle lines are drawn matters a whole lot. We at the Lawyers Committee have supported independent redistricting commissions through policy and legislation, but even those have to be watched as well. And another piece we're watching is police reform. When there are long, hot summers, so to speak, if I could borrow the phrase from the 60s, there's galvanizing of public attention. And for sure, public discourse has changed. But what has really changed on the ground in terms of people's experiences? If I, as a 6 foot something, built like a former football player on my best days, black man, if I put on my street clothes or hoodie, or if I'm wearing a suit and tie and I'm walking down a certain street, how am I going to be treated compared to other people? Will I be viewed with suspicion via conscious or even unconscious or implicit biases? And will it have higher stakes for me in terms of my ability to navigate through it and frankly to survive and stay alive through those interactions? So look, there are no victory laps. There's so much that's still on the table. What you can do in a private bar is, again, a lot of what you've been doing already, signing up for these pro bono opportunities as needed, investing your time, talent, and treasure. But I think there's another piece that I'm starting to see as well, and I hear it from Greg and I hear it from Phil, for Pulcinelli via Phil, which is, in addition to time, talent, treasure, there's another asset you have, which is your reputational capital. Mm-hmm. Our institutions or corporate legal departments, corporations proper, and law firms willing to put their reputational capital behind the effort to advance racial justice. It's not politics in the kind of the lowbrow sense. It's not partisan, frankly, at all. It's really about the issues. It's really about the narratives that I talked about. Access, justice, voice, power, belonging. The more you continue the work that you've been doing, the more you develop new initiatives and track your own progress and hold yourselves accountable, and the more that you place your own reputational capital behind these efforts, it's going to help us when we're in court on the higher ed diversity cases. It'll help us when we're suing the Proud Boys and doing other digital justice initiatives to stop online hate. It'll help us in these continued fights in every, frankly, state almost, and hamlet with respect to election rules and also with redistricting and the back end of census, which is looking more positive these days in terms of who will be counted. We have to have 360 approaches as civil rights organizations, and I'm seeing now law firms and corporate legal departments also take a 360 approach in terms of the stand that you're making. So I want to stop and open up for questions, but I hope these framing remarks and the few facts I've been able to share with you, a few facts, are informative and inspiring for you to really continue on the trajectory that you're on, which I think is a really strong one. Happy to talk more and answer questions.
Thank you, Damon. And we want to encourage everyone to ask questions. This is such a remarkable opportunity to speak with you about the breadth of your work. At this point, we'd suggest that you can move to gallery view for purposes of the conversation now, and then when we move into networking later. In terms of asking questions, you really have three options. You can turn yourself off mute, and at the next available moment of quiet, call it out. You can add your question into the chat and I will pose it to Damon, or you can note your name in the chat that you want to ask a question and we'll call on you. any of those options are available.
Shannon, I can kick things off with a question for Damon. And first, I really want to thank you, Damon, for some very inspiring and wonderful remarks. I'm just amazed at how much the Lawyers Committee is doing on so many fronts, and it's really important work, so thank you. So one question I had in listening was, we probably have a variety of folks in our membership who would be interested in contributing time on a pro bono basis. But one question that might come up, our in-house members, some of them are litigators and some of them are not litigators.
Right.
Are there, and for litigators, obviously, I can imagine there are a variety of opportunities to render pro bono service. What about for the non-litigators? Can they contribute on your initiatives, either public policy or advocacy work, that kind of thing?
Most certainly. The work I'm most familiar with is I work with law firms, but corporate legal departments and increasingly have been doing much more. And I'd say this, election protection that program is probably the easiest way to step in, no litigation experience needed. I even trained at one point, this is at a prior organization 15 years ago after Hurricane Katrina. Kristen actually and I were working together at the time. We trained almost 300 people, including some non-lawyers, to help with election coverage on site. So it's certainly possible, but our program here, we focus on those who are barred attorneys, but non-litigators can easily step in there. We also have worked with various entities seeking pro bono support on the policy front, especially those who have a really clear bipartisan sensibility, which is so important if you focus on getting things done and not just grandstanding. These days, we worked very closely with a couple of entities in the pro bono community on some of the police reform efforts in the last Congress. So we'd love to see those kind of things continue. And I will say, for the litigators, one of the things that is possible that we've done is some secondments, arrangements by which the corporate counsel or law firms would send us litigators for a time period. I know that's not the call of your question, but I did want to mention that, Greg. That's one thing that we've done. Not huge numbers, because we do have a staff that's approaching 100 people already, but on a select basis for clear, appropriate periods of time, months long, we've done that as well. And just on the election protection front, to add, again, it's not just the big, presidential cycle. There are elections around the corner in different places. And so the hotline only runs, 866-hour vote hotline, election protection hotline, it only runs based upon the lawyer volunteers who answer the calls. We operate the infrastructure, we provide the training, the expertise, the coordination, but we need lawyer volunteers, litigators or not, to answer those calls. And so that's a year-round need.
Thank you, Damon.
Mm-hmm.
Shannon, are there any other questions that you see?
Not so far in the chat, although lots of enthusiasm and appreciation for not only your comments today, but all of the work that you're doing, and lots of calls to action. We've got, I think, a lot of enthusiasm among our attendees for what you're doing and how we can get involved. Anybody else want to call out a question before we?
I do.
Great.
Hey, Shannon.
Hey, Diane.
Hi. Hey, Damon. Thank you. That was very inspiring. Thanks a lot for walking us through that. So my question is a tough one, I guess. How, with everything going on and every 24 hours or 2 hours that happens, there's something new to attack and to, try to protect. How do you triage that? How do you figure out what your priorities are and not, go off into every rabbit hole? Because every day there seems like something else you could, go after.
There are a lot, and we constantly talk about that. We have a large crew of attorney managers who supervise other attorneys who do kind of the laboring of the work. And look, it's a perennial challenge, Diane. I won't deny that. But I will say this: there's a few things that help us focus. And we're actually in the midst of ongoing strategic planning, which helps as well clarify mission. So I talked earlier about centering the lived experience of Black people and other people of color. So when we think through that lens, that helps us to think in a holistic and 360 way. Because if you think about it, you look at a community, especially an impoverished Black community, not all of them are obviously, but an impoverished one, you may experience something in the realm of health and equity, but you're also going to experience something with police and also something in education. So just kind of centering the experience, the centering helps a lot. I will also say we try to think about legacy effect as much as we can. And I think that's the challenge we're putting to elected officials right now. It's not just about what we do on our watch. It's also about what we do that can have some chance of lasting effect, some chance of collective resilience when the next retrenchment happens, which is frankly inevitable at the local, state, or federal levels. So that helps as well. And so I think to put it in lawyerly terms, it's about where can we secure new precedents, right? So for example, you won't see us filing a high volume of Title VII cases on behalf of individuals or even small classes. It'll be more about what can be precedent setting, what's really at risk, at stake, whether we're a rescue counsel coming in at the appellate level or whether we're working the case up from the ground up.
Damon, I have a question. I wanted to ask you about the work you're doing beyond the UT Austin and the Yale cases about student injustice that you're seeing in the college and universities. Can you speak to that?
Could you elaborate a little bit, Mary?
Sure. Are you seeing racial injustice in terms of student enrollment, declines, other issues on college and university campuses that you can speak to?
Well, certainly, there are barriers to access to start with. Number one, we issued not demand letters, but kind of letters urging for, guidance, leniency, and appropriately with respect to the testing requirements to gain admission. We know that there's a built-in disadvantage for many African-American applicants when it comes to your SATs or your LSATs. And we've seen some higher ed institutions abandon or at least temper those requirements, even for the bar exam. We all had to pass at least one bar exam to be where we are. But in this mobile environment with people having very different situations at home, we certainly urged, as much latitude as possible with respect to that. In terms of the on-campus experience, Mary, that makes its way into the higher ed cases. So at Harvard and, all of the institutions, but all of the cases, but especially Harvard and UNC, we have represented students, individual students, and our briefing and the testimony we put on in trial at UNC and Harvard was all about their experiences, the injustices that they face, their actual, again, their lived experience on their campuses, the space they have to hold, what it feels like to be the only one or one of the only ones in the room. And a question is asked about slavery or civil rights movement. Everyone turns to you because there's no one else. And it's not as if every Black person is an automatic expert, but you're an expert versus via your lived experience, right? No 20-year-old is going to know what it was like to be in Mississippi or Louisiana or Virginia, for that matter, at the height of the civil rights movement, but there's kind of this built-in expectation that you will, or that all the ins and outs of the movement for Black lives beyond what you read online, right? So that, and also the monuments, right? The Silent Sam in North Carolina monument, the other monuments, at UT, I was involved in Gratz Grutter and then the first Fisher case that went to the Supreme Court. And one of the things, the evolution from Gratz and Grutter, which is for some ways, for all the work we did, felt more academic. But when we got to Fisher, we were working with the Black students on campus and the Black alumni, we walked the campus with them and it shows, look at this, look at that. And there's no statue of Barbara Jordan, the late Barbara Jordan in the airport matters, which is the first thing you see when you get down to baggage claim and at the airport in Austin. That pales in comparison when you start seeing the Confederate monuments on campus, right? And so again, that kind of injustice is really important. I always vowed to sue my undergrad alma mater, Louisiana State University. We had on campus a room called a cafeteria called the Plantation Room. which they called the plant room as a euphemism. We had WP era murals all around where the white faces were distinguished and kind of in charge, and the black images of black people, you couldn't even see their faces. They were bent over working in fields. This was the murals that we saw. We had an African American Cultural Center that was funded by only Black students who had a charge on their fee bill. So many of those things on my campus have changed, but those are the types of things, in addition to what our clients have shared about the everyday injustices, the everyday aggravations, that frankly, over the years, some of us just kind of grew to expect and dare and sadly even tolerate. But the new energy from this generation, they're not tolerating it. They're not tolerating it. And I'm glad that we have the legal tools and the platforms to help them challenge these things. Hope that's responsive to you.
Yes, it was. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Damon. Again, great remarks and I think very inspirational. And you certainly made a very compelling case for why we all should be supporting the work of the Lawyers Committee and other groups performing similar work for our society. So I want to thank you for joining us and your great comments today. I will also pledge our chapter's support through volunteers and donations for the work that the Lawyers Committee is doing. Now, to our members, sponsors, and staff, I want to thank all of you as well for joining today. I look forward very much to working with you this year to deliver great programming and services, as well as continuing to expand our diversity, equity, and inclusion, and racial and social justice efforts. We hope to do this within our chapter, at our companies and organizations, and within our community. Thank you for attending, and I hope you will now stay tuned for our small group networking. Shannon?